Thank you so much for tuning in to Exit Ready. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. We're going to unpack ways for you to make your company more valuable so that when you get ready to exit, you can get the most money possible. Now to the show. Scott, it's good to have you on today. How's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, give a quick introduction so people know who you are and kind of where you land in this vast world of M&A.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually represent banks and non-bank lenders. So primarily SBA, 7A, and 504 transactions. I like to think of myself as kind of the deal quarterback on the financing side. The beauty of that is if I'm on the bank side and I'm working on a transaction, most of our clients have us involved from start to finish. So I'm seeing the buy side counsel, I'm seeing the sell side counsel, I'm working with the bank, title companies, escrow companies, brokers, you name it, seeing all of the different parts, the good, the bad, and ugly, if you will. And it's quite honestly, I couldn't imagine anything better in the deal world. But outside of that, I run our SBA department along with my partner, Chris Poling, and also Chandler Clark out of Indianapolis. We're a pretty large bench of lawyers and paralegals who specifically close deals all the time. That's what they eat, sleep, and breathe. And we've built that for many years. And again, I couldn't find another better practice area. Seeing entrepreneurs thrive, get the money that they need to do what they need to do is very rewarding.
Okay, so I think the first and most pressing question on my mind today is LinkedIn or Twitter, which is better for 2026? Like that's I gotta start there because that's been really bugging me. So, what's your take on that?
Fair enough. I mean, I'm going to say it depends, which is your quintessential lawyer response.
Okay, here we
But
go. Here we go. This
I
is
also think, and I tell lawyers this too, both. It depends on your practice area, but for me, I use those two platforms very differently. For me, LinkedIn has always been my bread and butter, but that's because my clientele are primarily on LinkedIn. My clients that I'm really looking to speak with from a business perspective are C-suite executives, owners of banks, people who are building banks, different institutions, different departments. They're mainly on LinkedIn. And so they're looking for content that either resonates with them from a business perspective or content that just allows them to know me, my firm, my vision for my firm in the future. So it's a different type of platform for that. Take it over to X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, right? That's where the searchers are. A lot of the lenders are there too, but searchers, brokers, buyers, sellers of businesses, entrepreneurs that are just getting started, that have done it for 10, 20, 30 plus years, sharing their wisdom, and usually just very quick and hopefully succinct ways that can really lead to some cool conversations. So if you're a buyer or a seller, I'm saying X and Twitter all the way. If you are a lawyer or somebody more in that space, I would say LinkedIn. And they're used differently too, I would say.
yeah. And the reality is, don't tell anybody. I don't like social media. Like I don't want to be there. I'm just there to meet people, to grow my business. That's why I'm there. And so it's always, but I do like seeing the news and sports news and stuff like that. So Twitter has that draw. It just draws you there because that's you can find that stuff. And LinkedIn's different, but anyways. So you and the reason for the audience, he had asked for a outline and I didn't say anything about LinkedIn or Twitter. So I wanted to throw a curveball. That was really the only reason I said okay. So you're a lawyer, so we're gonna hear it depends a lot. So I can give a caveat now if that makes it better. Like this is not legal advice, so there we go. It's educational content purposes only, whatever the proper disclosure is there. But let's just go through some things because you do see a lot SBA deals. Let's set the table, 5 million or less. When you're doing a 504, how big do those deals go up to? Because sometimes you can have a 7A and a 504. So SBA 7A for the business, 504 for the real estate. How big do 504 deals go up to?
Those can get a little bit larger, but you usually have permanent financing and then you have a takeout financing. Your SBA 7A deals, which are our primary focus area, are up to that $5 million cap, as you know, under the SBA program. But what we see a lot of are lenders who take advantage of pari passu lending. So although it goes up to that $5 million cap, there are ways to add conventional pari passu financing, lines of credit on top of it. So those transactions, I've seen transactions get into the 10 million plus, even on 7A transactions. It's just piggybacked with different creative lending structures that are still, in alignment with the 7A program, the 7A regulations, et cetera.
Okay, so as a lawyer, when you're looking at these deals and you're advising banks and on should this go forward or not, what are some of the red flags that you see commonly that, especially for owner standpoint, but also for buyers that come up that prevent deals from getting to the finish line?
I think the largest thing is when the parties don't communicate. And you can take that for whatever it's worth, whether it's between buyer and seller if there's no attorneys involved, whether it's between buyer and seller's counsel if there are attorneys involved, or if it's between any of those parties and the bank's attorney, right? Because we usually get involved when a commitment letter is signed with the bank. And a lot of times that's a little ways into the transaction. And all of a sudden, we'll receive a contract. We'll look at the seller note, for example, and say, hey, this structure requires the seller note to be used as equity injection for the borrower, for example. That means that that seller note has to be on full standby for the term of the SBA loan. And I read the contract and I say, this doesn't look like the seller understands or knows this. That might be something the seller wants to know, right? At that point, they have to go back and, they've got a little bit of egg on their face at that point. If they bring it up later in the game, then we have a whole bunch of feelings about restructuring the deal, what the purchase price is going to be, how everything looks. From my perspective, that's really difficult because in the SBA world, on something like that, I use the seller note as an example, there's not wiggle room on that. That is an SBA requirement. So if that is the route that the borrower wants to take, the borrower has to communicate that either through their counsel to the seller or to the seller directly so that that buyer and that seller are rowing in the same direction throughout the closing process. Otherwise, that's when you get busted deals, at least from the
Yeah.
compliance standpoint.
So you mentioned communication, and so I'm curious how much of that communication is because they're not talking, and also because they presume that they've done everything right, but maybe the seller or buyer doesn't have a good M&A attorney familiar with SBA rules and stuff like that. So how much is it just they're not talking versus they've got who they think are experts, but they're just the wrong type of experts for this type of deal?
I would say most of the time it's actually, I'm not trying to throw attorneys under the bus, but it's a buyer and a seller engaging counsel that has never seen or has only seen a couple M&A deals in his or her life. Those situations, there might be good intentions by both sides, but at the end of the day, if they have not done an SBA deal before, they're working in waters that they've never been in before. And that can cause some issues. So getting that right deal team is absolutely essential to being able to get a deal done and get a deal done right.
Yeah, I was sitting in a room this week with a buyer and a seller, and I said, "Hey guys, if you're gonna go forward, you have to use M&A attorneys. Like it's not even on, like it's just not gonna work if you don't. You can't use your cousin, the divorce attorney, or whatever it might be, or a business attorney who doesn't do M&A deals. You have to use one because this is a high stakes, high risk, high reward game, and you don't want something 3 years from now where there's a lawsuit or whatever because you didn't structure it right, or the deal falls apart because you didn't know, or you're battling over all this stuff. And you know, not being a lawyer, we like to hate on lawyers, and lawyers sometimes like to hate on lawyers. But I don't think that we don't understand the complexity of the law, and you're going, well, why do you need a specialized lawyer for this? And it makes sense. And so maybe unpack why you need a specialized lawyer, especially on SBA deals, because to me, just open the phone book, call a lawyer, and go, hey, write me a contract for this deal so I can buy this and close it. So explain a little bit more detail of like different types of lawyers and why they don't understand this stuff.
Yeah, the most common way I like to put it is you think it in the healthcare context, right? If I was suffering from a heart attack or I had some sort of heart issue, I'm not going to a podiatrist. That podiatrist could be incredibly intelligent, knows his or her craft like anything else. But if I go there and I have a heart issue, that doctor is going to have a really difficult time actually saving my life, right? It's the same way, lower stakes, obviously. We're not dealing with life or death in most situations. But if you came to me with a criminal law issue, it would be negligent for me to take that. who needs to take that is somebody who has experience in that area. Because the thing about lawyers is we all go to law school. We may take a couple of different classes, but at the end of the day, we go to law school and we're all generalists. It's not until you get into your industry that you really start to focus. And if you're going with somebody who has never seen an M&A deal before, you're really going to have a difficult time. If you go into an M&A deal and you add on that layer of complexity, the SBA piece, the compliance piece with a lawyer who's never seen SBA before, half of the things that they see, they're going to say, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it. Why is it that way? Well, it's that way because you're working under a government guaranteed program that has requirements, four corner requirements that we have to play in with inside that box. So that restricts what the structure is going to look like, for better or for worse, right? But at the end of the day, that's what the banks have to follow. And if the buyer and seller's attorney do not know that, haven't seen it, don't understand it, even worse, if they've never done an M&A deal, that's a recipe for disaster. And
Yeah.
when we're talking about these types of transactions, experience, of course, matters. Any lawyer can draft up a contract. Any non-lawyer can draft up a contract. It's not that hard. And there's a difference between getting a contract and getting a deal done and getting a contract and getting a deal done right. I have a
Right.
lot of transactions that I see that there are no attorneys involved in the transaction, and it may be SBA compliant from the bank's perspective, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I'm representing the buyer or I was representing the seller, I'd be putting indemnities in there. I'd be
Hmm.
making sure this non-compete is airtight. I'd be making sure
Hmm.
there's a consulting term. I'd be making sure a lot of things that maybe they're not thinking about.
Hmm.
So it might seem that all that matters is closing a deal and closing the transaction. That's not 100% true. What does this deal and what does that contract do a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Those entrepreneurs that are hiring the experts don't stop at, hey, I just drafted a contract and we closed your deal. Most of those entrepreneurs that I know go back to those same attorneys, and those attorneys help them scale for
Yeah.
years, if not decades, into the future to really get things going.
Yeah. And so you mentioned most of your clients are banks, right? So is there a certain percentage that you'd put on that number?
Almost 100%.
Okay.
I
Okay.
used
100%. Okay.
to.
Yeah.
If we were to go in back in time, I don't need to give you my entire background unless your audience is interested in that. I used to do a lot of buy side M&A work, right?
Okay.
But since SBA took off, I've focused my practice and my team's practice. We're at about 20 now. All of us doing 100% lending work.
Okay. So if I'm an owner and I'm hearing an attorney who represents the bank, I'm going, is this person actually going to help me get my deal done? Are they going to stop me from doing this deal with the bank? And like, I don't understand why the bank has an attorney to look at my deal. So, like, what are you doing that's going to help the owner or prevent the owner from getting this deal done?
Yeah, I like to say that you should not consider a bank's attorney as a deal stopper by any means. SBA is very unique because what we're doing, our client, the bank, our job is to protect what's called the SBA guarantee. That means that we're here not to kill the deal, but we're here to make sure that the deal follows the regulatory requirements under the SBA program. Usually that's going to be SOP 5010-8 at this time, and any of the other policies and procedures that get released after that. So if we get a transaction that comes through the door, our job is both to do that, but also to organize the closing. If we have a situation where, let's say, an owner is selling a business to a buyer and it's one of those situations where unfortunately they don't have counsel, we get in there, and the first thing that we do is say, okay, we have a seller, we have a buyer. Okay, there's real estate in California. Okay, it's a business acquisition in California. What do we need? Buyer, seller. We need an escrow company. We need a title company. We need to get the ball rolling. Putting all of those pieces together, as I said earlier, with a quarterback kind of analogy, to quarterback the deal to get that thing to the closing table. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to close the transaction. It's aligned with the buyer and the seller. The only added piece that we have is we need to close it correctly for the bank's sake. And that's where some of the uh, people misconstrue when a bank's attorney is involved, saying, oh, the bank's attorney looked at my contract's good to go. Well, yeah, it's good to go from a compliance standpoint for the bank. I can't ethically jump in and say, oh, hey, your contract is missing this, 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 and this, and I could write it better. You can't do that. That's a buy side attorney. And that's why my goal, like not primary goal, I guess, but one of my goals in this industry is to work with the best of the best who aren't on my team, right? So buyers attorneys, sellers attorneys, I use social media primarily to meet people across the country who go deep in these areas so that when somebody needs someone, I'm not taking that business. I'm not getting a referral fee. I'm saying, hey, I have a list of the best of the best. Talk to these people. You might see me on a deal. I'll be for the bank, but these people, they will take care of you.
Yeah, and I think that's what separates probably M&A deals, if you get the right team in place, is that everyone is actually trying to get the deal done. Now
Yeah.
your potential lawyer or tax attorney or whatever, they're trying to protect you. But if they're good, they're trying to protect you while trying to get the deal done. And the only reason they should stop the deal is something crazy like, no, you can't agree to these terms. But the bank's attorney is not someone who's trying to stop the deal, because the bank makes money when the deal's done. So the attorney is trying to make sure that the deal happens. And so it's not a fearful thing you should be fearful of. You should have the right representation to help you understand this stuff. But a lot of owners seem to not understand or not think through what you talked about earlier with the doctor analogy. And when you get into M&A, I always tell owners, you're an expert at a roofing company. I don't know how to put a roof on a house. But in this world, you're not an expert. Not that I'm an expert of all things. I'm not saying I am. And in fact, I don't do legal work. I've had owners call me say, "Hey, look at this contract." I'm like, "Well, I will look at it, but if you get sued, you're not calling me. Like, I can't do anything for you." And so owners have they've mastered being great at what they do, but then when they go to sell their business, they don't realize that they probably need more people on their team to help them get this across the line than they originally thought of. And so when it comes to the banks, I always advise owners on SBA size deals to go talk to a bank or a SBA lender, to make sure they get at least a SBA valuation. Because if you're a shrewd buyer, you're going to call the SBA just to see what the SBA would do on this as well.
Mhm.
And I pound this a lot. Maybe unpack for owners, is it the best decision for them to call the bank they've been doing business with for 15, 20 years to see about the SBA process through their bank to get the valuation? Or is it best to shop around? Because like most SBA banks that I come across that are good at the deals, you never even heard of. Like, you just don't have a checking account there. Like oh, First Internet Bank. I was talking to Alan Peterson. It's like First Internet Bank. You don't. Okay, cool. It almost sounds like a scam. It's not, but it sounds like a scam. So if you're an owner, you go, why can't I go talk to Bank X down the street here? I've done business with them. I know the president of the bank. Why can't I talk to them? Why do I need to talk to a specific SBA bank?
Mhm. Well, first off, I would say I would encourage any owners or searchers or whoever it might be to look at the SBA's website, right? Because, like you said, some of these really talented banks you might not know from billboards on the side of the road or anything like that, but they are so prevalent in the space and good at what they do. The SBA's website has things like volume closed per bank, type of deal closed per bank, closing rate, success rate, all of those different things. So you can get on there and you can find some pretty cool data points that will lead you in the right direction. There are also other companies out there. Lumos Data is one of them. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they publish this publicly available information from the SBA's website, but they put it in nice little graphics to say, oh, okay, here are the banks that are really crushing it in the acquisition space, or here are the banks that are really crushing it in the real estate space. At the end of the day, like, all lenders aren't created equal. And I think they would admit that too. Certain lenders go really, really deep into acquisitions. That's their bread and butter. That's what they do. It's almost the same conversation we just had about the doctor and attorneys, right? Some banks are just known for it. So I recommend that those owners, those searchers, they do that type of research. They find the right fit for them, and then they go in and they figure out who to go with. It's not shopping around. I definitely don't, advise shopping around all the time, at least in not that sense. But it's understanding that there are differences and that there are options out there.
Yeah, and when I say shopping around, probably should clarify that. What I mean is, just because it's an SBA bank, a top SBA bank, it doesn't mean that they want to lend in the space that you're in. They might have a
Yeah.
certain buy box or sell box, however you want to phrase that they do. And so you do need to kind of understand that. So you can go look the volume, but you also need to understand, okay, hey, do you work in, oil and gas, for instance, not exploration, but other parts of oil and gas. Some
Yeah.
don't. Do you work in Texas? Some do, some don't. So you kind of understand that as well, that they may not specialize in your industry and want to avoid that for whatever reason. And a lot of times it seems that owners or even buyers will talk to a bank and they will say, "Oh, I can't do this. It's not SBA approved," realizing it's not bank approved. That bank just doesn't want to deal with this type of deal. It's too small, too big, whatever it might be. Has nothing to do with SBA. And so, if you're an owner, you're going, "Okay, well, that sounds really complicated. How do I figure out? I can go to these sites, but you know." I go through this process of talking to a few people. Okay, this bank, X bank is the best bank for me and my business, my size. Now that I've kind of got a valuation, I like this price that the SBA is going to give me. What are the things that I'm going to do that's going to frustrate the bank that might end the deal that I need to go ahead and fix now? And how long does it take to fix them?
hmm I think the biggest red flag would be lying on an application. If you're a borrower, at least, inflating numbers, getting something over to the bank or to the buyer, and having those numbers look different than what they actually are. Because at the end of the day, if you end up talking to whatever bank it is, and you end up getting a commitment letter as a borrower, that kicks off due diligence. That kicks off all of the requirements under the SBA program, which normally that's going to include a business valuation. That's going to include tax transcripts. That's going to include really getting not invasive necessarily, but getting pretty deep into the specifics of this business that is being purchased. So it's going to be uncovered, right? And if that's the false information that I mentioned as a red flag, yeah, that's bad. But it could also be as simple as undisclosed liens, undisclosed federal tax liens, UCC liens, issues with commercial real estate if it's a part of the transaction, trusts, parties involved that weren't disclosed. All of those types of things. The sooner that we know about them, the better, because if there are issues, you can usually resolve issues if they're disclosed with adequate time, right? If they come up later, that is just going to be a really negative situation. And I think this somewhat ties into something I wanted to mention earlier too, when you asked about lawyers who represent banks and are they good, are they bad for the buyer and seller? The right lawyer is a big net value add. Obviously, I'm biased, so don't take don't take my word for it, right? But to me, a good banking attorney can make or break a deal, not because they're going to get something right or wrong, but for instance, if I've been doing SBA for whatever years, if something comes across the table and it is an issue, like what we just mentioned, I'm able to talk with the bank and say, okay, here's an issue. It doesn't mean that the deal is dead, but let's talk about solutions, right? How can we creatively go about this and make it so that it is compliant? Not cutting corners, but figure out how to get to the closing table. That's very different than an attorney who gets something and sees an issue and says, okay, not SBA eligible, this deal's dead. I'm sorry. And I know there are attorneys like that out there, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We flag issues, but you find the solutions.
Right. So, are there? Let's start with the first category. Are there things that once you see them, you're like, okay, this deal is dead. Like, fix this before you ever go through this process.
There could be a lot of those. I think that would be what's called ineligible use of proceeds, or an eligibility issue from a structure standpoint. So, what I mean by that, the most basic situation would be somebody wants to use loan proceeds to buy a marijuana distribution business. You can't do it yet, right? It's illegal, right? That is a no-go. But the more common situation you're going to see is you get somebody, a sophisticated buyer and seller, who come to an agreement on this structure where, let's say, they want to buy a passive holdco that owns a bunch of other things. They're going to roll it up, not in an eligible transaction roll-up structure, but they're going to buy a holding company. If you're using proceeds to buy a holding company, you can't do that. That's an ineligible use of proceeds. It's an ineligible structure. That would be a dead on arrival situation. But there's ways to think about it differently. If it's real estate, having a EPC, an eligible passive company, you can have an eligible passive company buy real estate. It's just all depends on the structure.
Okay, so let's do this one then. What's kind of the normal time that from when you get the contract for the bank to closing? What's kind of that normal time period? And are there things that can be done? It might extend the time period, but they can't actually be fixed in this time period. It's better to fix it before, but they come up. You're like, okay, you got to fix this. Things that you do see, like, okay, if you do this, it's gonna take you an extra month or two. But what are those things that you see a lot of?
For timeline, I think that was the first question you asked. Is if we get a commitment letter, that's usually going to be 45 to 90 days is when closing happens. Obviously, much more if there's construction involved and there are hairy deals that can take much longer. But 45 to 90 is usually how long something's on my desk. But if you have an issue that comes up, let's use the example of you're buying real estate, and the real estate that you're purchasing has some sort of recorded restriction on it. Okay. So let's say there is a restriction on title that says this location can only be used as a branded C store for insert your brand name in perpetuity for the rest of the real estate's lifetime. That would be a problem because if a bank has to liquidate that collateral, they have a really, really small pool of people they can sell it to, right? That sort of situation, we can identify that, take a look at it, say, okay, who's the contact party? Reach out to that contact party, negotiate its removal, or negotiate with the title insurance company to insure over it to make sure the title is clear. That's a pretty extreme example because that would be very difficult to be removed. But that's just one example, or easement issues, things that come up on title.
Well, I like the extreme example there because owners might go, "Oh, that's not me. I don't have that." But I would caution you to go, "Okay, you probably don't have that one, but there's a bunch of other issues that might come up that this is why you have to talk to people to understand what are the potential landmines that could end the deal. Because how often do you see it to where the deal could be resolved, but it's not resolved? So you said 45 to 90 days, I think. And so something comes up and it's just like, okay, the buyer's like, okay, the bank, I'm like, whatever, I'm out, I'm out. This could have been resolved if you had done it before, but now the deal just dies.
It usually happens due to frustrations, right? If you get and you think that you are closing in 7 days, something is disclosed and you say, yeah, that's not getting done in 7 days. That's getting done in 21 days. Like that's going to take a while. And then all of a sudden, a certain contract that they really wanted expires, or the parties just get so hot headed, they say, I'm done, right? That does not happen often, I will say. Because I like to think that I work with the best of the best lenders. The lenders that I work with, if they've signed a commitment, they've vetted that deal pretty hard, right? If something comes up, we're going to figure it out by the time it hits my desk. But there are situations, like you mentioned, that could potentially happen.
Well, and if you're not working with the best of the best, you increase the odds of stuff like that happening. And
Yeah.
you mentioned owners or buyers getting hot headed, and maybe the banks get hot headed too. I don't know. I don't deal with those a lot. I'll deal like this, but um, it can seem like, okay, hey, 21 days versus 7 days, no big deal. But the tension, the pressure, it just really builds as you get closer to closing. All the I's dotted, all the T's crossed. You're expecting your life to change on the first. Now it's the 21st, and it just plays with your head. And so I can see a path to where um, people are backing out over this over 14 days. It might sound kind of whimsical, but no,
Yeah.
it's real. It's real. And even more extreme, people might go, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna stay cool-headed." But I talked to Rob Kell the other day, and he talked about a deal fell apart because a helicopter crash and people die, and someone gets sick, and so all that time, it exposes you to all kinds of stuff. I got a story I can tell you offline if you want to hear about a huge international deal that fell apart because I pushed the deadline and then someone died. And so there's just stuff that happens, and it's not the norm. It's not to be like a scare tactic, but it is just something to consider because I've been trying to think of a good analogy and see if you agree with this or not. M&A is kind of like playing, I don't know if poker is the best analogy, where you're playing the odds of, okay, this is my hand, here are the cards I've got, here are the cards on the table, here are the players, these are the odds I have of winning. And the better you can increase the odds, the more likely you are to actually win the pot, in this case, or close the deal. And so maybe you have a better analogy than that, but I'm trying to put it in a way that owners can kind of go, okay, oh, no, I play poker, okay. If you got 2-7 offsuit, you just fold, and so you don't want to
Yeah.
go to to market with a 2-7 offsuit, but if you got pocket aces, maybe you should ride that thing out a little bit longer. But it does seem to be very much an odds game that the more you increase your odds, the more likely you are to close. It doesn't mean that 100% odd company is going to close. Things happen. But if
Hmm.
you have this thing lined up, you increase your odds substantially. And I don't think that really that message it is odds. Is odds the way you describe it, or how would you describe it?
Odds is a way. I like to think of the deals, at least most deals, as being pretty transparent with one another and knowing how things are going to shake out. But like you said, there are so many things that come out. I think a game of poker is a good way to describe it. The situations that we see that are oddballs that maybe the owners or the borrowers or whoever aren't thinking about are third parties that really can't be as controlled. Landlords is a good example, or those unintended liens that maybe nobody really knew about. Stuff like that comes up, and when it does, you have to take those odds and look at them and say, all right, here's where we're at, here's what we need to do, here's what the timeline looks like, and is this a good play or is it not? Most of the time, by the time that we have that deal on our desks, they've already sunk in deal costs. They've already considered all of the different options. They've gotten to a point where if they were to walk away at that juncture, it would be pretty devastating, probably to all parties, not just one.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's definitely it can definitely be devastating. I've seen that before. It's like, oh man, this whole thing fell apart. And but you mentioned earlier on the SOPs with the SBA, and everyone's trying to get the deal done, but sometimes it feels like owners they've had good relationships with banks in the past, and so they've gotten special favors or loans they weren't really qualified for because they knew the president. And but in this world, you probably can't lean on the lender a lot to get the deal done because there are certain rules they do have to follow that just say, hey, this is go, no go. So how does this type of an SBA loan differ from maybe a working capital loan or something like that that they're just getting from the bank and a line of credit, you might say?
That's a really good way to put it, I think, because there is a big difference between a standard conventional loan and an SBA loan. Because you said favors on the other end, banks can take a little bit more risk because there's nothing really to lose other than if you made the wrong call and the loan defaults. In the SBA world, there's the guarantee, right? Rules are rules, and if those rules are broken or the protocol's not properly followed when the deal closes, if the bank later goes to do what's called repurchase of the SBA guarantee, the SBA is going to look at the transaction and they're going to say, okay, did you follow the rules? And if you did not follow the rules, there could be a repair or there could be a denial. Repair being they're not going to honor a portion of the guarantee. A denial saying we're not guaranteeing anything. So, bank, I know that you relied on this guarantee to give credit to somebody who otherwise could not get credit. You're not getting that money back that we had guaranteed at the initial outset because you did something wrong. So, banks aren't going to break strict SOP rules. I think the only caveat that we could put there is banks have different credit boxes. So that's outside of eligibility. Eligibility is the big one. That's what I'm looking at. But credit box, some banks like to see certain numbers, other banks don't. Some banks are more comfortable with franchises, others aren't. Some banks are more comfortable with investor deals. I do quite a bit of those, some aren't. So you look at credit box, you look at risk assessment, those types of things do differ. But the rules, those are the rules.
And so I'm guessing going back to what we said earlier, if you go to your local bank and they don't do a lot of these loans, they might view these rules as more stringent than they are, which prevents them from doing deals. And so
Mhm.
going to a bank that does a lot of SBA deals, it doesn't mean that the floodgates are open, but understanding, oh, this is actually my risk as the bank on lending on this company versus my local bank who their lawyer's like, no, don't ever touch this because here's the risk. There is a guarantee, and so it does help. It would seem, at least from my perspective, it would help the deal go through because the bank's going, okay, there is a guarantee to get the money back. So how does that work from the bank standpoint? Like, what percentage of the loan is actually guaranteed? So that how much risk does the bank actually put up when they give a loan on, let's say, $1 million deal?
It depends on the threshold. So dollar value, type of deal, term of the loan, all of those things. So I can't put an exact percentage on it, but it's written out in the SOP specifically what percentage they're going to get back. It doesn't change from bank to bank. It's in there. But what you do want to consider, and it's a good point that you brought up, is if you're going to a local bank, they may not have the experience and have seen how to overcome issues when they come up. I think that's a big one too. So the banks that are nimble, that are on their feet, that again, I'm biased, but have counsel, those banks are much more likely to be able to take a situation and get it across the finish line than maybe the bank that looks at it and says, "Oh, this isn't. I'm over my head. I'm not going to do it. I'm not taking the risk." Right. And that brings me to the idea of GP lenders, general processing lenders, and then also PLP lenders. PLP lenders can act unilaterally on certain things rather than asking the SBA to approve a transaction. It doesn't mean that GP lenders are worse than PLP or PLP is better than GP lenders. It just means that they're different. PLP lenders have a license to be able to make certain decisions without having to go to the SBA because they have a proven track record of having deals close and having deals close be audited in the SBA saying, "We trust you. You know what you're doing." So usually that's going to be, your bigger named SBA banks that have been doing a large number of volume deals in a given year.
So I think it was last year, Trump administration changed some of the SBA rules. How does that factor into this process? If you're thinking about selling and the SBA is talking about changing, and like, what's the history? So if you're looking ahead, going, okay, they just changed the rules. Should I expect rule changes this year, every 5 years? Does it matter about presidency? Like, is there any guidance on how to think about that? And then how do the banks react once the rules have been changed? How long does it take for deals from their perspective to get processed?
That's a fantastic question. And I've been at the firm that I'm at for about 11 years. And it used to be SOP changes, is what you're referring to, did not happen very often. Annual would be an overstatement. Like every other year or so, they would have a new, fresh SOP that comes out and it changes the number, and there are significant changes. That all kind of changed last year. Like you mentioned, there was a big overhaul of rule changes, which happens when administrations change as well. And when those changes go into place, you'll usually have the SBA release it before it's effective, so that the attorneys, the banks, even borrowers, if they get copies and things like that, you can look at it and it'll say effective, whatever, 2 months later. Then, when that goes into effect, that's when the banks have to start abiding by that specific SOP based on when the deal is approved. So, we did see quite a bit of changes last year. Citizenship was a big one. Complex multi step changes of ownership, partial changes of ownership are now allowed. That didn't used to be a thing years ago. Seller note injection requirements. I kind of started this conversation using a seller note as example, right? So there was a period of time where a new SOP released, and you could use a seller note as injection if it was on standby for 2 years in certain circumstances. It then reverted back to what it is now, which is full standby for the life of the loan, which is what it was a year or so ago. So when those changes come about, there's usually a lot of chatter about it. And I know I keep going back to social media, and that's probably really, really lame. But you brought it up, right? X, Twitter, LinkedIn, and things like that. You have banks, you have attorneys, you have people who are talking about these things and saying, "Hey, by the way, this changed." Because some of these changes that come out can completely alter the way investors look at deals. It can alter the way a buyer searches for a willing seller, or a seller, searches for a willing buyer, because it changes what type of funds are going to hit their account and whether or not their deals are even eligible for SBA financing. It's quite a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, we see a lot. I talk about the interest rates and how that might impact deals, but the SOP
Yeah.
changes in this world probably have a bigger impact. I mean, obviously, if the interest rates were like 35%, it wouldn't matter, but the SOPs
Right.
can have a bigger impact. So, not being a lawyer, this might be a dumb question. I don't know. Let's just say we're recording this on January 15th. So tomorrow, Trump announced, new SBA SOP changes. Is it case law dependent then? Like, how long does it take for the banks to be comfortable? Did the lawyers just read it? You're shaking your head, so bad question. So help me understand.
No, no, no. Not a bad question at all. I just case law dependent. No, if they decide, the regulators decide they're going to issue a new SOP, that comes out with a specific effective date. That's coming from the SBA directly. And once that effective date comes, let's say that the effective date is February 1st. That'd be really quick, right? But February 1st, the new SOP is effective. And February 2nd, you have a deal that's closing that was approved in December of 2025, right? You would be under the old SOP, even though it's after February 1st. But then if you had a deal that was closing March 15th that was approved on February 2nd, February 1st effective SOP would be in place. So there was a period of time, almost like a straddle period, when partial ownership changes, everything kind of changed, where you could actually be closing transactions that under the newest SOP couldn't be closed so long as it was under the old SOP, right? And then once everything is getting approved after that point, it's under the most recent. And I guess
Yeah.
then they included in that too is changes to the SOP come from a variety of different factors.
Yeah.
Political climate, of course, can have quite a large impact. We saw that with this last administration trying to tighten things up, taking a more conservative approach.
Hmm.
That's pretty common, but it doesn't necessarily stem from just subjective thoughts. It
Yeah.
usually will stem from, hey, we just looked at history of default rates, or we've looked at history of performance in loans and we figured out that this makes sense or this doesn't make sense, and we've made those changes for this reason. But there's not case law necessarily, or
Okay.
a rhyme or reason outside of those pieces.
So I go to market under the current SOP. Um, at which stage of the process am I for sure? Because it's not like Michael Scott in The Office. I declare bankruptcy. Like so, at what part of the process do you actually have to get under the current SOP? I don't know if there's talk of changes now, but assuming there's no talk of changes, but at what like how far along do you have to be ensured that today's
Yeah.
SOP applies to your deal?
So it's going to be when your lender pulls approval. And that's usually a little later in the closing process, but it's before closing. They will pull what's called a PLP number, and that reserves your place in line, so to speak, right? It means that they have said, hey, SBA, I want to give money, and you are going to federally back a portion of that money, and you have said yes. So they've allocated that guarantee on that date to your specific loan. That's the number that, if we were pulling up loan documents on the screen, right, and you had a promissory note, the promissory note will say approval date. That's the date that they're going to go with.
Okay, so make sure I'm following then. I'm going to sell my company. We get to that stage on January 16th, and Trump announces on the Monday that February 1st, there are wide sweeping changes. I'm locked in for the current SOP if those changes would disqualify my deal. Like I'm secure then. Is that correct?
If you had the approval, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why
Okay.
a lot of times we'll see it would be good to do another one of these, like if this was coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get an SOP that comes out and there's a date that it's effective and there are some deals that will no longer be eligible, there is a mad dash or scramble for buyers, sellers, and the banks to pull PLP is what it's called, because all those that pull the PLP during that time period are under that SOP. If that date goes by and you pull after that period, you're under the new SOP, which could mean new rules. But I do think that it's worth noting in this conversation that we're kind of talking about SOP changes as if it happens often. And it was a lot more prevalent last year than it's been in the past. Typically, though, there are not drastic changes in the SOP, and they do not happen frequently. Not to say that it couldn't happen again, but they like continuity. We don't want to just be pulling the rug out from people and saying, "Oh, nope, you can't do that now." There's usually a reason for why they issue a new SOP, and it's usually to protect the buyers, to protect the bank, and to make these deals better, not worse.
Yeah. Well, Trump hasn't called me today, so I don't know what his wind, where it's blowing on him. So, but the last I heard from him, there's no plans. But that doesn't mean that it can't. And so it's
Right.
not a fear tactic. I'm with you that it's probably not going to happen, but also just the awareness that it could happen and it could impact your deal. So if the current SOP is favorable to what you're trying to do, go ahead and understand that this is great and it can change. It's not like it's a long drawn out process, years in the Supreme Court waiting to hear a decision. Like it can just
Yeah.
change, and so you just have to understand that that's a risk, and so small risk, but it is out there. Okay, um, if you're talking to just a random owner and they said, "Hey, I'm going to sell my business," um, give me the one or two, three things. Just kind of recap here of what I need to make sure that I do so the bank loves me when I come to them.
I think it is communicating often and early, being organized, and having a plan. So I guess those all kind of relate to one another, right? But it's communicating with the bank, making sure that you are organized and having a plan. And when I say having a plan, I don't just mean, oh, I have everything written out of what I want to do and how I want this beautiful loan process to go when I sell my business. It means, hey, I have an accountant, I have a lawyer. I have an idea of who my buyer is. I have an idea of what my business is worth. I have the documentation. Here it is. This is what I want to do. Here's when I have to close. Here's when I want to close. Take it. And if you have all of those different things, it's not only going to make the process easier for that owner, it's going to make the process easier for that prospective buyer, and it's going to make the process a whole lot easier for the bank and the parties that are involved. There are deals that when you say those type of things, or you ask these types of questions, in my head, the gears are just turning. I'm like, oh, I remember that borrower, right? I still follow along with that borrower's journey. And guess what? That borrower that bought that business from that owner, that borrower and that owner still keep in touch.
Mm-hmm.
That business thriving, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing fantastic, and they still use the same attorney, and they're continuing to scale. And just watching their story unfold is unlike anything you could ever imagine in terms of professional satisfaction. To see that and to know that, time and time again, it plays out. So it's very fun to see.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Okay, so you mentioned that banks are your clients. If you're a banker, obviously, or just a lender, I mean, not a lender, an owner or a buyer who wants us to kind of understand SBA, what's going on social media, where can people find you to kind of follow along with the content that you're putting out?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's the more professional, long form content. I do a lot of updates on SOP changes if they come down the pipeline, or just ways to get your deal done. So it's just Scott Oliver on LinkedIn or on X, Twitter. It's a little bit more informal, but I do like interacting quite a bit with searchers, buyers, sellers, attorneys, and that's at SAO_attorney.
Okay, man. Well, it was great to connect with you. I love the picture you put with the dollar a week or two ago. That was awesome.
Hey, what did you have? I didn't even see what kind of coin that was. Was that a
It was a
quarter?
It was a quarter. It was around here somewhere. I just picked a quarter up off my desk and tried to hold it. So
Told you, man. We're high rollers around here.
high rollers. That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, man. And if the SOPs change, I will definitely reach out to hear your opinion on
Yeah,
that, and we'll be following along.
for sure. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.